Good morning, I think. Good morning, I think we'll get started. We're going to get started soon. Thank you. He's not here.
Where's Councilmember Powers? All right, well.
He's here? Oh, okay. Okay. So, good morning, everyone. We'll get started the meeting now. I just want to note for the record that members Jones, Austin, and Regan will not be attending today due to work conflicts. First thing we'll do is approve the minutes for the May 8th meeting. Is there a motion? So moved. A second? Anyone with any proposed changes or edits? Any questions? None? All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Thank you. The minutes are approved. Now I'm going to invite Dr. Patsy Yang to address the board. As you all know, Dr. Yang is Senior Vice President for the Correctional Health Services, a division that provides medical, mental health, and dental services to individuals in the New York City jail system. Dr. Yang will provide an update on the CHS services' recent work in the jails. Dr. Yang, thank you.
Podiums like this, so I apologize for my back towards everybody. This is working. How's this? Better? Now? Yes. Okay, I apologize for my back too, everybody. Good morning. So it's been about a year, I think, since we've updated you on what we've been doing. I'm sorry, remove that. Yeah, thank you. Thank you. I do this. All right. Good. Nope. Thank you. All right. So some of the stuff we've been doing behind the scenes is really to reinforce our infrastructure. Most notably for the board, we've created an incident management system which tracks our response reports of and investigations of complaints and workplace violence. We've actually hired about 120 mission-driven clinicians. We now have affiliations with 34 academic training programs, and we've internally created a system of staff and vendor accountability. We're really changing the culture within from one of a contractor to one, with a punitive edge to one that is really all our staff with supportive and transparent oversight and direction. Some of the other things that we've done really is really consolidate substance use treatment services into the mental health service, and Dr. Giftos will be speaking to you next month about what we've been doing there. It really improved the way we do mental health, most notably the growth of our PACE and our CAPS units, the way we do care modeling in the MOs, our 730 mobile team for people who are coming back from the state hospital, and court services, which is really pushing alternatives to incarceration. We think that all of these things have led to a New York City record, which has been that we have had no suicide in over 9 quarters. That's really a record. For care during detention, again, we have our enhanced pre-arraignment screening program, which in the first 16 months since we went 24/7, we've screened over 63,000 people, 24% of whom we've avoided an emergency department run, which is really disrupting their court processing, clogs up the EDs, takes up PD resources. 58% of the case summaries, which were with defendant consent given to defense attorneys, have indicated 58% had better court outcomes as a result of our summaries. We're working with the Criminal Justice Agency to partner to increase defense use of our summaries for court outcomes. And we have been funded through FY19 and 20 for citywide replication of the enhanced PASU citywide. Our PACE units, we continue to open more and more. We have 6 right now. We have 6 more to go by 2020. We're really excited about that. In hepatitis C, we have quadrupled the number of initiated in-jail treatments. In FY16, in all of FY16, for example, we initiated only 28. And in the first 9 months of this fiscal year, we have 127 initiated jail treatments. In telehealth, we continue to grow telehealth. That increases access, both among and within the jails, and with Bellevue and Elmhurst and Kohler. Enhancing, let's see, what am I doing? That is out of order, the slide. So I'm just going to skip over. We lost a slide, I think. Oh, okay, that was me. We have doubled the number of people on methadone, tripled the number of people on bupe, about 1,000 patients in MAT at a given time. I won't go farther into that, again, because Dr. Grievance is going to go in depth in July. Our satellite clinics, we are up to 22 now. We continue to open some of them for specific services or to increase access and tie them to our cohorted units. As a result of some of the First Lady's initiatives, we've increased or improving health services we provide to women who are detained. The initiatives for us are to bring mental health services to women in our medical infirmary, to counsel and help plan for women who are at high risk for intimate partner violence on release, and sort of provide self-management for stress and coping skills. At our complete, on a voluntary basis, we realized that the competency evaluation, that forensic psych clinics that were actually run by Kings County and Bellevue citywide were something whose mission their mission was closer to ours than it was to Bellevue or Kings. And so we had some discussions within health and hospitals, and as of April 1, the Queens and Brooklyn clinics are now part of our operation. And in July, the Manhattan and the Bronx ones will come over. We're also, later this month, working with the Mayor's Office of Criminal Justice, launching a pilot that will streamline the 730 evaluation process. It's currently about 43 days on average, and the goal there will be 7 days and 14 days from the time of court order for the evaluation to completion for misdemeanors and felonies, respectively. Now, okay. We're also very much interested in trying to reduce the population and avoid recidivism, and that means that we start working with patients the day they arrive in jail. Some of the things that we're trying to do here, you'll see discharge planning. We are standardizing the core set of functions that any of CHS's discharge planning services will provide. Again, we've beefed up our court liaison services. We are expanding medical discharge planning to chronic conditions other than HIV. We have increased our work on compassionate releases, and in 2018 so far this year, we've succeeded in getting 8 cases released and placed, and we are extending our reentry and transition support services, really tying to health and hospitals as well. On Medicaid, again, we were really pleased that 55% of the people who come into jail have active Medicaid or an application in process. And we are working with HRA, currently estimates 95% of those are reactivated within 2 business days of their discharge. We are working with HRA to make sure that anybody who's released with their Medicaid fee-for-service for 4 months gets hooked up with a managed care plan before they lose their coverage. And in December, we started our own pilot to focus on the 45% of people who don't have Medicaid when they come in. And the idea there is to offer Medicaid application assistance within the first 24, 48 hours of being in jail. And in our pilot in NKC, in just 2 shifts, about half of the people we asked were interested, and again, about 40% of those who were interested actually ended up getting an application for us. That two-tour, 1 jail pilot actually accounted for about 1/5 of all the applications we've been sending in. So that's great. We're growing it and going to 3 tours in NKC and starting in Rosie's by July. Sorry, naloxone is something that we're also doing. We continue to do training and distribution at the visitor center. And we have been funded to expand that over to the borough jails as well as to our assistance center, which is across the street from the bridge. And we've also begun actually e-prescribing naloxone. So people who are in our substance use program and are getting trained and educated on how to use it, and when they leave jail, they can go to their neighborhood pharmacy and pick that up. And then going just really, I think that was it. For the future is basically, we're going to continue to enhance and improve the way we deliver care. We're leveraging health and hospitals to reduce the likelihood of recidivism. And we're, of course, working with external partners around Raise the Age and the borough jails. That's it.
discuss a little bit, I'm going to ask it all together, you can answer it. Plans for replacement of MOs with pacement and caps. There's an RHU issue that we're thinking about, you know, in our standards and our rulemaking process, and also, you know, when the board has visited the mental observation units, we certainly saw places which I don't think meet your standards for care. The next question is you talked about these forensic clinics and organizing that process. Is there adequate are there adequate state beds for the restoration of competence? Is there any backlog at that side? Because you can only get so efficient on your side. And the third is, how does your budget get protected from health? How does the CHS budget get protected during a period when health and hospitals have a $1 billion plus or minus minus deficit? Substantial.
So I'll go backwards if that's okay. So our budgets, Correctional Health Services is separately funded. We're funded directly by the city. And so there's a separate agreement, a multi-agency agreement that was entered into at the time that Correctional Health moved over from DOHMH to Health and Hospitals, precisely to protect it from that. So they're segregated. The second one on the state, we have been working with the state over the last year on their restoration beds. They're opening up another unit, another 25-bed unit shortly, I think this month, actually, if not last month, at Kirby, which we think will, at least the state believes will reduce the waiting time to maybe a week or two. And we continue to talk to them about, you know, the possibilities of local restoration, which is a complicated question. And the plan continues. We're funded to open up 6 more PACE units, which are really conversions. They're not new beds. They're converting MOs to PACE and CAPS, which are models that we think they're internationally renowned and efficacious.
Deservedly so, I think.
Thanks.
Yeah, Mr. Richards.
Thank you, Patsy. A question in terms of the on-Allen specialty clinics and I'm sorry if I haven't get back up. The off-Allen specialty clinics seem like it's been going up. Congratulations on
Thank
that.
you. Yep.
I know it's been a lot of work. But can you talk about the on-Allen, the specialty clinic on-Allen percentage of people seen is only 47%?
Yeah, so there's a couple of things. One is that we're actually looking, again, given the report, the analysis that the BOC did and presented last month, at how we're counting things. So on island, we continue to work with DOC on production issues. We continue to expand our telehealth installations so that the actual travel, even on island, so we can use them within jails. So for example, on telepsych, we're going to be starting that soon. We're using that for intakes in a couple of our jails. That's not specialty, but yeah, we're working on it.
And could you talk about the city's doing this CPDS study, looking at the jails, closing Rikers. You've been implementing some amazing responses to what's going on Rikers Island with respect to health. Could you talk a little bit about your vision for how these strategies will be carried over into the smaller, fairer system?
Thank you. We have, a number of us in correctional health as well. DOC, every agency that's involved has been deeply involved, as have been you. This is a really unprecedented opportunity, and we're really excited about it. All our good practices are things that we are saving and protecting, and hope to grow in the new facilities. We don't tend to go backwards or back down. We instead intend to grow them. Even though the population is projected to be smaller, we expect that they may be more complex and more challenging in a number of ways, and we're preparing for that.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thanks very much. Anyone else? Questions? So we want to welcome Councilmember Keith Powers to this morning's meeting. Councilman Powers represents New York's District 4, covering the east side of Manhattan and Midtown. Councilmember Powers is the Chair of the Criminal Justice Committee for the City Council. We welcome you, Councilman, and look forward to your remarks.
Thank you. You did the intro, so I don't have to explain who I am and where I'm from.
Right.
But I am from the east side of Manhattan, and I'm a new council member as of January 1st, and not only have the fortune of being a council member, but also have the responsibility and the fortune of being the new chair of the Criminal Justice Committee. And I just wanted to explain that in a second, but first of all, I just want to say thank you for having me, and thank you for allowing me the opportunity to be here. Thank you. I've gotten the opportunity so far to know some members of the board and the staff, and so far have had a great experience getting to the opportunity to work with the Board of Corrections, who have provided us as a city council with information and insight into the correction system. I also want to note, I know the commissioner, her team are here as well, and I've had the great opportunity to get to know them and work with them. And I know that many council members see their role in as a chair or as a council member to be combative on all fronts, but I see it differently. I see it as a collaborative experience where we will have issues we will raise to them, they will respond, we will work together to help fix those issues, and I do trust that everybody here is on a shared mission to improve the lives of all New Yorkers. And so even where between all of the entities here today we may have disagreements or we may have differences of opinion, I know that we are all working together, and I really have to give them a lot of credit for the work they've put in. The beginning of this, yesterday, you probably saw, if you read the newspapers today, we came to an agreement with the mayor on a $90 billion budget, or 89 point something billion dollar budget, which is, of course, there's money in there around Rikers Island and the correction system, but we have sat through, and the board was there as well, hours together with the department and the Board of Corrections. So thank you for participating in that and being part of that. On January 1st, not only did I take office, I took this responsibility to be the chair of the criminal justice system. And for clarity's sake, there are actually two committees that probably many folks in this, well, probably more, but more that many folks in here would care about if you care about the criminal justice system. There is the Justice System Committee, which oversees the court system and the DAs in New York City, and then there's the Criminal Justice Services Committee, which is what I chair, which oversees the Board of Corrections, the Department of Corrections, the Department of Probation. I think many of us will know, in this room will know, this committee leading into this year as the one that had predominance, continues to have predominant oversight over the closure and the future of Rikers Island and the borough-based facilities. And of course, this year we announced the siting of those locations. I believe it was on Valentine's Day, whatever cruel intention I might have, that we announced the new locations for borough-based facilities that will replace Rikers, and that meant that we put a timeline to it, and also we announced the new locations. And I know that at least one of the locations continues to be up for discussion in the Bronx about exactly where it will be located, but that was important to the city council and to the mayor in the sense of actually creating a pathway to putting the new jails, actually citing them and naming them and telling us where they were, and creating expectations with the community about what a process might look like in the future. And I anticipate that sometime this fall, we will be beginning the land use process for citing those facilities, and it may be perhaps that ends up in the next year as well. At the same time, I just will say we're lucky enough to, as the city council members, to tour with Stanley Richards from the board earlier this year to take a tour, and the department, of course, who hosted us. And I think it continued to convince us that the process that we are engaging in about moving these off of Rikers Island into the boroughs was a good, important, and meaningful practice, and it offers a lot of opportunity to improve many of the issues that we care about here, whether it's the health care services, whether it's keeping people connected to their communities, whether it's making sure that these are safe and secure and modernized jails. So thank you for joining us on that. Of course, we have a role that goes beyond just the land use process of citing those. The most important at the city council is really our oversight function. And earlier this year, we actually invested in that in a real way that had not been done under previous city councils by creating a stronger oversight and investigations committee. And I apologize in advance to many of those who will get more work as a result of that, but it's an important function that the council has had for a very long time but hasn't invested in, which is to actually put staff and resources into this oversight function, not just the budget, not just land use, not just legislation, but to do oversight over both city agencies, over issues, over organizations. And we take that very seriously, and I'm happy to be part of that committee as well, to make sure that we can take a deeper look into issues. And yes, we will outsource some of that work to many of you as well, or we will take some of your work, in fact, and actually use that as a way to sort of, as a launching pad to do more work. But that committee is already underway. And of course, in my committee, we've been doing oversight work as well. We started with a number of budget hearings that many folks here participated in, but we also have had oversight hearings on safety and security in the jails. I wanted to thank Dr. Cohen and the Executive Director, Martha King, for joining us in that to talk to us a little bit more about the measures that you guys have taken to help balance between safety and security and, of course, the responsibility of taking care of those who are in our custody. We will continue in the next few months and into the fall to keep doing oversight type of hearings. Everything from oversight on the process by which we cite the jails to the studies that come out, continue things around safety and securities. We have taken up issues that the department has brought to us, the board has brought to us, things like issues in Albany around safety on with body scanners and ensuring that we have safety inside of the jail setting. And we want to make sure that anybody who is incarcerated does not have a feeling like when they come back out that they were not safe or secure. And of course, the people that work inside, whether it's the doctors and the healthcare staff or the officers, feel like every day they go to work and they are in a safe setting. We held our budget hearings in March and May to review the $1.4 billion budget. I won't get ahead of ourselves. There's certainly more money in the budgets to look ahead for the borough-based facilities. We've repurposed money. We've looked at more money. We talked about money for training academy, money for more services. Earlier this year, the mayor announced more money for mental health services and money for particularly targeted towards the female population in the jail. So I think on Thursday we will be passing that budget, and then immediately looking forward to next year's budget and ways that we can continue to support the work that they'll be doing here. In the future, I think we'll be talking about the healthcare system, ensuring that we are in programming inside of the jails to make sure that in our oversight function we believe that there is a appropriate service being provided to the people. And we're meeting our mandates. We have a lot of mandates, whether they're the New York City mandates, New York State, federal mandates. Obviously, there's a monitor, the board's mandates. So make sure that we are living up to the promise that we deliver to people when we do these bills or we pass these laws. I just wanted to mention that I know that one of the issues being discussed today is the grievance report that the board will be discussing. I presume not yet, but soon, and we will be supporting that, the recommendations laid out in the report. I believe the City Council, and I'm a signer of it, will be sending a letter in support of that, and we will certainly look to talk to the department and the board in more detail about that, and we'll be looking at ways we can work together to help modify the grievance process to ensure that the voices of those individuals are heard and those issues don't turn into large-scale crises. And then lastly, I'll just touch on a couple things. The two last things I'll talk about, just legislative component here. We have heard some bills already. One of the issues that the council, I think, is very interested in is the issue that we've talked about in the past. There's a bill Speaker has right now around fees, around for those who are inside of Rikers Island or one of the other facilities. Phone calls, particularly, being one of the issues that's taken up, particularly the consideration of the council, but certainly things like commissary and vending machines and other issues that have been reported on that I think the council has taken a deeper interest in to make sure that we are not, in our own budget, looking at those folks as a source of revenue for the city of New York. It's really a modest cost to the city of New York in terms of what some of these fees add up to, but certainly has more of an impact on the people and their families who are inside of Rikers or any of the other facilities. So that is taken up particular consideration. Others that we are looking at would continue to do some more reporting requirements around lockdowns and safety and security, use of force, many other issues that we care about. And those, I know those reporting requirements are onerous on the agency, but do help provide the council with more information about what is happening inside of any of the facilities and how people are being treated. And then it also does help us come to better recommendations and help us legislate better in the future. So those are some of the legislative goals. Those are important parts of the job that we do, and we will always be looking to take some of the recommendations you make into consideration as we are passing laws or considering the laws of the City of New York in terms of how we treat folks. And anything that we can do, I believe I speak for the council as a whole here, even where there's disagreement, anything we can do to keep people connected to their communities and their families is really, really important to, I think, all of us in the City Council, regardless of your opinion on any sort of particular issue, and really lowering the population in our city jails and making sure that we have successful reintegration into the communities when people return is, I think, important to all the council members, and I think I can speak for that as a council as a whole. We have a lot of issues that will keep us very busy. The land use process that I discussed, continuing to look at the study that's coming out that will help talk about redesign, with also part of that process, continued legislation and oversight functions, and then back into the budget process in the future. I don't have to tell you guys we are sort of in an unprecedented time in terms of the discussion around criminal justice issues in this country. We are at an unprecedented time in New York City in terms of when we talk about the big ticket issues like Rikers Island, all the way down to issues about basic everyday safety, security, and services inside of our jails. I speak earnestly when I say that I really do believe we all have sort of a shared and collective responsibility to treat that both in a balanced way, but not to be part of the solution in terms of fixing problems within our jails. I think continue to exist, but also making them more modernized and making sure that people are receiving basic and essential services and staying connected to their community. We will be working a lot on these issues in the next couple of months. I certainly have a lot on my list of hearings that we will be doing. But I wanted to say thank you for, and I'll be happy to answer any questions, but thank you for your continued work, and thank you for the work that you do on behalf of New Yorkers who often don't have a voice, and often we feel like do need an appropriate amount of oversight to make sure they are being treated well. And again, thank you to the department. I know we have a lot of work ahead of us, and all of us here today. But I really am looking forward to that work and working together with the board. And I know I speak on behalf of the other 50 council members when I say we appreciate the work that you do, and we will all be looking forward to working with you together.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councilman.
Thank you.
Appreciate your remarks. Yeah, sure.
First of all, thank you so much for coming.
Thank you.
I am one of your constituents.
Oh,
on
good.
every side. Delighted
I
that
can't
you
say you're my favorite,
are.
but well, you're up there.
Thank you. So I have a question. Can you comment at all about moving the youth off Rikers to comply with the Nunez consent judgment and raise the age?
Yeah, for raise age. There's concerns in the council, and the concerns that we brought this up at hearings. I don't know if it was our hearing or it was at the other committee's hearings about raise the age. I think it's the concern of continuity. I mean, we are really trying. I mean, first of all, two things. One of the things we had to fund in this year's budget was the implementation of raise the age, because it's a state issue that then comes down to the city in terms of a cost. I think it was about $100 million that the city was unfunded in that mandate, meaning we had to pick up the cost that the state passed on to us. We don't like always doing that, but we certainly believe that the mission is an appropriate mission, and that we did fund it. We did fund the $100 million. I think it was $100 million to pick up that cost. I think the concern continues to be at a point where we are saying that we should be taking people out of the correction system who are of a certain age, that we are doing continuity in terms of the folks that are continuing to serve them. Meaning, I think there's concern on both sides. I know that there are some folks who on the COBA and others have raised concerns about their own parts of that process. But I think on the council side, there have been a lot of questions that came up at hearings around the continuity, and that we are supposed to be moving over to ACS, which is really more appropriate, I think, for folks of that age, and yet we are taking some 2 or 3 years to do that. I think what we've heard in response to that is that they will get there, but it will require about a 2-year period in order to fully make the conversion over from corrections officers to ACS. I think that is a concern of a lot of council members, and I try to play with the realities of what it takes to staff up an agency and to try to do that. But I will say, I think I certainly feel, and I think other members do too, expedited would be important for us in sort of making that happen. We would obviously, I think, prefer complete conversion over to ACS immediately. But I've heard from both, I think, the Department of Corrections and also the Mayor's Office of Criminal Justice that that's I don't know if impossible is the term, but it's difficult at this moment. So I'm trying to be practical in terms of what my expectations are, but we will, I think, continue to, and I should say, there are definitely other members who feel even stronger than I do about this and feel like that it's not an acceptable situation. The last thing I will say, though, this is also the reality of the city and state interplay, where the state can pass laws, they pass down to us, they pass a cost on to us, they pass an immediate mandate to us, a timeline to us. We have to meet those mandates. We share those goals, but we have to meet the timelines, meet the mandates, meet the funding. And so continuously, when we are receiving mandates from either from Albany or the feds, we do ask them to share in the cost or help us to assist us with the implementation of it, not just to pass laws and tell us to create the mandate for us, but to assist with us in that process. And I think that's something that I would pass on as something important to us, is that we have voices from all levels of government in this process and funding streams where possible. Yeah, thanks.
Anyone else? Question? Thanks very much.
You guys are easy. All right, thank you. Thank you.
Councilmember. So we'll move on to the next agenda item, which are the sexual abuse investigations. The board's newest minimum standards, which went into effect at the beginning of 2017, were designed to prevent and respond to sexual abuse and harassment of people who are incarcerated in the city's jails. The standards require prompt, thorough, and objective investigations and provide many specific rules for how those investigations are carried out. At the board's April 2018 meeting, I provided the board and the public with an update on the department's compliance with those standards. We know that currently investigations are not being completed within 90 days as required. 94% of 2016 and 2017 investigations of sexual abuse and harassment remain open and pending. This is 1,851 open cases out of 1,974 complaints. Additionally, rates of substantiation we know in New York City remain much lower than national averages. In 2016 and 17, a total of 4 complaints were substantiated in New York City. According to a 2011 DOJ survey of adult facilities, an estimated 21% of allegations of staff sexual misconduct and 15% of allegations of staff sexual harassment in jails were substantiated. At the conclusion of the April discussion, the board committed to working with the department to finalize a corrective action plan, informing the board and the public how the department would come into compliance with these standards. And the Deputy Commissioner of the Trials and Investigations Division, Serena Townsend, and her team have been actively working with board staff on this plan. Thank you, DC Townsend, for your work in this area, and we invite you to present your corrective action plan now.
Thank you. Good morning. Nice to see you again. As already been mentioned, my name is Serena Townsend. I'm the Deputy Commissioner of the Investigations and Trials Division. I last testified here on April 20th, 2018, regarding PREA investigations and new initiatives that the department would pursue in order to become board minimum standards compliant. Today, I'm here to provide a more concrete plan for compliance and to share some insight into what the department has done in the last 6 weeks to move towards board minimum standards compliance. Recently, the department provided the board with a corrective action plan. We identified the department's open PREA reportable caseload to be 1,295 cases. As I mentioned at the April meeting, all of these cases have been investigated already by PREA certified investigators within the first 72 hours of the allegation. Out of the 1,295 PREA cases that are pending closure, 1,216 are allegations that are older than 90 days. In April, the department emphasized to the board the need for additional PREA staff and described an interim solution to resolve older cases until the department is able to meet those staffing needs. Today, the department will report on its 6-week progress, as well as explain how it intends to systematically meet the two goals of, 1, resolving the 1,216 cases that are over 90 days old and are pending closure, and 2, complying with Section 530M to close newer PREA allegations within 90 days going forward. On April 20th, 2018, the department reported that one strategy it would employ immediately would be to change the structure of the PREA closing memorandum. More specifically, it would reformulate the memo, shortening it, without omitting important details so that investigators would be able to close their cases more swiftly, but without compromising the integrity of the investigation itself. The department has followed through with this strategy and began using the revised memo as of April 16th of 2018. A second strategy the department discussed with the board in April was to leverage the merge with the department's trials unit and have a trials supervisor review and close older cases. Starting on April 23rd, 2018, the department has relied not only on the trials supervisor, but also on other investigation division supervisors to close these cases, which again have already been investigated, and to close them using the expedited closure memorandum. Since that day, since April 23rd of 2018, using these two strategies alone, and before we've had any additional staff join the PREA team, the department has been able to close 64 PREA cases. Moving forward, the department has a concrete corrective action plan in place to expedite the closing of older cases and to comply with Section 530M. Just last month, the first group of new investigators has arrived at the department. The new investigators undergo weeks of training as well as PREA certification in order to handle investigations properly. The Investigation Division's PREA team is currently staffed with 19 investigators, 2 supervising investigators, and 1 deputy director. The caseloads for PREA investigators reach, on average, over 90 cases. The investigators are also tasked with responding to call-outs within 72 hours of an allegation. And as discussed last April, this caseload is insurmountable at this pace. At minimum, the Investigation Division needs 30 investigators, 6 supervising investigators, and 2 deputy directors. Thus, to meet the demands of board minimum standards compliance, the department needs to add 11 investigators, 4 supervising investigators, and 1 deputy director to the Investigation Division PREA team. These numbers would allow investigators enough time to close old cases, investigate new cases in a timely fashion, and upon reaching that balance, maintain what the department considers a workable caseload of approximately 30 cases. Based on the current hiring trend within the department's goal is to add the requisite managerial staff to the PREA team by September of 2018. On a rolling basis, the department will continuously add PREA investigators to the PREA team with a target completion date of January of 2019. As investigators come on board, existing caseloads will be redistributed and closed with the expedited closure form. Our goals are as follows. By August of 2018, which is our next reporting period, we expect to close 300 additional cases. By February of 2019, which is the following reporting period, our goal is to close the cases that are older than 90 days. and to be in substantial compliance with Standard 530M. The department will continue to rely on its short-term and long-term solutions to become compliant with board minimum standards. The department will keep the board updated on progress every 6 months as mandated. Thank you for your time and careful consideration. I appreciate it.
Thanks very much. Any questions or comments here?
I have some questions. I haven't seen yet the 5-page report versus the 10-page report. Could you tell us what's not in the 5-page report that was in the 10-page report?
It's less about what's not in there and it's more about format. So as opposed to having the investigators create long narratives about every single step that was taken, the investigators will have the ability to give one narrative and check off boxes with respect to what was done and what was not done, what needed to be done, what didn't need to be done. It's a faster process that still incorporates all of the important and required information.
And, one more question. You talked about the fast track pilot program.
Yes.
Which, as I understand it, involves cases where you've identified a problem and are negotiating some agreement with a staff member about changing their status. Could you explain to me why fast track is a good approach to that? I understand swift and certain in terms of changing practice and approaches to sexual harassment and sexual abuse, but I'm concerned, having looked at some oath proceedings, that limited investigations of these serious allegations will put you at a disadvantage at the oath process.
Sure. Let me explain the fast track process a little bit better. Most of the fast track cases that we have employed are actually on the use of force cases as opposed to sexual allegations. Fast track is only ever employed when there is a case that is very, very clear what the misconduct is and does not require additional investigation above and beyond what's already captured. So, for example, in use of force cases, we only employ fast track in cases where the use of force is captured on Genetech video. Similarly, in a sexual allegation or harassment case, we would only ever employ a fast track process to a case where it's extremely clear, which is why in PREA cases, fast track doesn't apply as often as it does in a use of force case, simply because the nature of these cases are usually not that clear cut. What we've done with fast track with respect to our PREA team is try to lighten the PREA team's caseload by employing it for cases that the PREA team members are carrying that could fall into this category, some of which are actually use of force cases, which in turn helps the PREA attorneys, the PREA investigators, be able to investigate the PREA allegations with more time because their use of force cases that are clear cut are not weighing them down. So fast track was much more employed with respect to use of force types of cases. And so, yeah.
It seems like staffing level, it comes to play. Is it that the department don't have the lines and for the lines, or you just haven't found the right people for the job?
Actually, we have the lines now, and we are actively hiring. So, in fact, yesterday we had 11 new investigators start at the department, and they are currently in their first day of training. So we have the lines that we think will give us the opportunity to staff up this PREA team. It's just a matter of going through the process of hiring and all of the outside background checks and things of that nature.
Great.
Just
Please stand.
yeah, a question. You talk about how to handle the backlog. How will you be handling newer cases to ensure that they don't sort of end up with this in the backlog?
Good question. So we are going to be handling the cases that are over 90 days old in an aggressive fashion. With adding the staff members on a rolling basis and being able to redistribute cases in that way, we feel comfortable in our goals and that we would be able to address the cases that are approaching 90 days on a rolling basis. What could end up happening is we identify the newer old cases that are approaching the 90 days and do a reevaluation once these original older cases are complete and have a second wave of backlog closure so that we would be able to address that on a rolling basis moving forward. Right, and also with our core stat process where we would be able to implement these meetings and discussions on best practices. Moving forward, we'll be able to attack those cases that are approaching the 90 days.
Using that huddle. Thank you.
I would just,
Sure.
you mentioned in some prior communication with the board a core track process of quantifying and monitoring this process, and now just other tracking processes that the city has engaged. And I worry about such processes because I think they've often encouraged a substantial manipulation of figures in other organizations. I hope this works, and the board will be invited to observe those meetings when they occur. Would that be okay?
Sure.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So we'll move on to the next agenda item, which is on the board staff's newest study of the inmate grievance system. Back in the 1970s, in the wake of violence and uprisings in the city's jails, voters revised the New York City Charter to create stronger oversight of the jails in the form of this New York City Board of Correction. One of the primary mandates of the revitalized board was to establish a system to hear grievances or requests for assistance from people in custody and staff. This was a move recommended by the State Senate Committee on Crime and Correction and was in line with prison reform across the country. The idea was to create systems that could respond to issues in jails and prisons before they build to violence. In testimony to the Charter Revision Commission in 1975, then board chair Peter Tufo outlined 4 purposes of the grievance system that remain today. 1, to address problems that might otherwise fester unnoticed except by those aggrieved within the system. These include problems meeting the core needs of people in custody, including access to religious services, telephone, letters, visits, and legal services. 2, promote tranquility of the institution and foster better morale for staff and people in custody alike. 3, provide a unique and valuable source of insight into problems within the system. And 4, to indicate to people in custody that we all recognize the fallibility of any large bureaucratic structure and are, as a city, willing to attempt to minimize those flaws. Additionally, a grievance system effective at problem solving should decrease lawsuits filed against the department and subsequent payouts. From fiscal year 2014 to fiscal year 2017, the number of claims filed against the department increased over 50%, and settlement and judgment costs increased 236%. Yesterday, the board staff published its second assessment of the department's inmate grievance system. We find a system that, despite a few improvements in recent years, has major structural problems, including a lack of critical policy for responding to tens of thousands of 311 calls each year, unequal access and availability, and an opaque, confusing, and underutilized appeal process. While these findings are apparent in the data, similar concerns are frequently raised in these public hearings and in phone calls direct to the Board of Correction. Too frequently, people tell us of stories of calling 311 or filing a grievance about a matter personal and important to them and never receiving a response. These structural problems lead to unmet needs, increased tension, perceptions of unfairness, and unaddressed systemic issues inside the city's jails. Our report makes recommendations, and we've also provided extensive related comment on the department's draft grievance directive. We look forward to continuing to work with the department on fixing the grievance program, and our Deputy Executive Director of Research, Emily Turner, will present the study now.
Good morning. My name is Emily Turner. As Martha said, I'm the Deputy Executive Director of Research with the board. And I'm joined here with Nashla Rivas-Salas, our Director of Research, who worked on this report. We would like to thank the board for this opportunity to present our findings from the second assessment of the inmate grievance system, and we'd also like to thank James Boyd and the entire staff of the Office of Constituent and Grievance Services, as well as Patrick Alberts and Patricia Morgese from Correctional Health Services Patient Relations for their commitment and ongoing collaboration to improve the inmate grievance system. We look forward to working closely with them to implement many of the recommendations in this report. The department defines a complaint as something that directly and personally affects a person in custody. DOC's Inmate Grievance and Request Program provides a process for a person to file a complaint, guidelines for the investigation, resolution, and communication with the grievant, and an appellate process should the parties disagree. The complaint must be related to one of 29 categories of issues deemed grievable by the department. If the complaint does not fall into one of these 29 categories, staff deems it either a non-grievable complaint or a request and refers it to a separate office where it is not subject to the IGRP process. 13 of the 29 grievance categories overlap directly with minimum standards, such as classification, laundry, visits, and law library, among others. Complaints related to grievable matters are entitled to a response from the department within 5 business days, and resolutions provided by the department may be appealed. Non-grievable complaints that fall outside those 29 categories include matters such as staff complaints, assault allegations, and complaints related to the disciplinary process, among others. These complaints are handled by entities and protocols outside the IGRP. Additionally, the department receives notification that friends, family, and advocates, or someone else in custody has called 311. In 2015, calls to 311 became free for people in custody. In the spring of 2017, the department created and disseminated posters throughout DOC facilities that inform people in custody about the grievance program with instructions for how to call 311. All 311 complaints from people in custody are forwarded to the Office of Constituent and Grievance Services, which oversees the Inmate Grievance and Request Program. In addition, the Independent Health Authority, Correctional Health Services, also takes complaints directly from people in custody, and these complaints fall outside the DOC complaint process. They also receive complaints from 311. People in custody must utilize the IGRP process in order to obtain a final response from the department with regard to any grievance or request, unless there is an identified alternative process for resolving a particular issue. As a matter of law, you're often required to exhaust administrative remedies, such as those through the IGRP process, before seeking relief from the judicial system and any other external agency. Failure to file a grievance or request with the IGRP may prevent you from seeking external relief. That is why the system is so critical, it's so critical that the system operates effectively. This slide shows the many different entities who handle complaints related to people in custody, including BOC, which reviews appeals from 8 different types of complaints related to minimum standards. Several entities are responsible for addressing complaints that are not subject to the grievance process. For example, facility leadership, including wardens and division chiefs, address complaints related to matters such as security designations, protective custody, and other complaints related to the disciplinary process, for example. Also, the investigations division, as we just heard, is responsible for investigating complaints regarding assaults, PREA issues, and staff misconduct allegations. Now I'll turn this over to Nashla.
For this assessment, we reviewed aggregate reports prepared by OCGS for fiscal years 2016 and 2017. We also reviewed data on grievable complaint resolutions for fiscal 2017. We conducted a case file audit of 262 complaints from fiscal year 2016. This included 149 grievable and 113 non-grievable complaints. And we reviewed aggregate complaint data from Health and Hospitals Correctional Health Services for fiscal years 2016 and 2017. Our findings centered around 4 key areas. the volume and types of complaints from people in custody, access to the grievance process, resolutions and appeals, and quality assurance and oversight. Nearly 4 times as many complaints were filed via 311 than the grievance system in fiscal 2017. The number of calls to 311 with complaints about city jails increased 49% from fiscal year 2016 to fiscal year 2017, while the number of complaints filed directly with OCGS at DOC facilities decreased 15% over the same period. Whether or not related to a grievance category, a 311 complaint does not automatically initiate the formal grievance process. OCGS staff must follow up with the person in custody to file a grievance. It is not clear how many of these complaints are duplicative, meaning a person in custody filed a written complaint and called 311 about the same issue. It is also not clear how the department tracks and communicates timely resolutions of 311 complaints. Nearly 40% of all complaints filed with grievance were not subject to the grievance process. This included over 2,200 non-grievable complaints and 669 requests for information. In these cases, OCGS notifies grievance that it has referred the complaint to a different office, but they are not told when they can expect a response. People in custody are also not informed about what the investigation will look like for complaints of this matter. 5 categories made up nearly 50% of all complaints received by OCGS. These 5 categories have been the top complaints consistently for the past 5 years. They include complaints about DOC staff, employment complaints, which typically include complaints about an individual's payroll or workload while incarcerated, inmate financial account complaints, which tend to be related to account PIN numbers, and the proper crediting of money to accounts from any source except DOC employment, jail time calculations, which are generally filed to challenge the accuracy of a person's projected date of release or transfer, and complaints about personal property.
In light of these recommendations, we recommend that the department develop a written policy that clarifies how complaints to 311 interact with the grievance system. This policy should explain the role of OCGS staff in following up on complaints made via 311 and should ensure that all 311 complaints receive a response. We also recommend that the department educate people in custody about which complaints are not subject to the grievance process and implement a central system for tracking the resolution of complaints not subject to the IGRP process. This process should be transparent, responsive, and fair. We further recommend that the department develop a system-wide approach to address complaints about staff and coordinate with the department's ongoing staff development issues, including the early warning system required by the Nunez consent judgment.
Our next area of finding involved access to the grievance system. We found that people in custody have unequal access to the complaint system, which depends in large on the jails in which they are housed. For example, facilities range in the number of grievance boxes they have, from 1 box at GRVC to 25 boxes at MDC. Additionally, grievance coordinators' workloads vary dramatically depending on the facility which they are assigned. We also found that people in custody are not informed about protections against retaliation for filing complaints, which may negatively influence individuals' likelihood to use the system.
We recommend that the department ensure equal access to the grievance process. This may involve developing caseload guidelines for grievance coordinators and officers and may require securing additional resources to meet those guidelines.
Next, we reviewed data on resolutions and appeals. If a person in custody files a complaint that falls into one of the 29 grievable categories, the person is entitled to an initial response from OCGS and 3 levels of appeals. 95% of complaints were closed after the initial OCGS response. Only 20 people appealed any grievance decision, and out of those, 10 received a decision from the Central Office Review Committee, or CORC, which is the department's final stage of review. None of the appeals that made it to the CORC were provided to the board prior to the CORC decision. It is unclear from the data how many people completed all levels of appeals.
In light of these findings, we recommend that the department shorten and simplify the grievance appeal process by eliminating a step in the appeals process so a grievant need only appeal twice to receive a final determination. We recommend that the department clarify resolution forms and clearly indicate the process to initiate appeal. Currently, the resolution forms are confusing and need to be clarified. We also would request that the department share appeals that reach the CORC level with the board, as is currently required by their policy, so that BOC recommendations can help inform the CORC decisions.
Finally, we looked at quality assurance and oversight related to the grievance process. To do so, we audited 262 complaints. We found that many forms appeared incomplete. 41% of all cases audited were not time-stamped, making it difficult to track compliance with response deadlines. The resolution form itself is not designed to clearly indicate when a grievant wishes to appeal a resolution. 58% of audited complaints did not indicate if the grievant accepted or rejected the resolution, and of these, 64% of those also did not have a signature. Without this indication, it is impossible to know if the grievant wanted to appeal or if the grievant even received the informal response. This is problematic because it could be interpreted as a waiver of appellate rights.
Since January of 2017, OCGS has implemented the use of an electronic system called Service Desk to track complaints received. This system makes it easier to track the life cycle of a complaint. The board needs access to Service Desk to audit cases in real time, as many complaints and resulting investigations relate to DOC minimum standards. Finally, with respect to quality assurance and oversight, we recommend that the board update Service Desk and provide the board with direct access. We further recommend that the department develop policies and an internal OCGS monitoring process to ensure grievances are appropriately time-stamped, responses are provided to grievance within 5 business days, and all appropriate data and documentation is entered and saved in Service Desk. We also recommend that the department develop an action plan to evaluate and address the drivers of top grievance categories: employment, inmate financial accounts, jail time calculations, and personal property complaints, which have been an ongoing areas of concern for people in custody. Thank you.
Thanks very much.
I want to thank staff for that report. I'm very interested in hearing the department's response, because there are obviously a lot of very serious concerns which have been re-raised in this report. But specifically, it's problem. I know it's been it's quite problematic for the board not to have access to Service Desk and its data. Can the department tell the board when when we will have access to this information?
So good morning, everyone. My name is James Boyd. I am the Director of Constituent and Grievance Services. We thank the board for looking into this very important topic. We appreciate the board's support and hard work that went into this study, and we continue to share the same goals to make a more efficient, transparent, and responsive grievance system. Inmate grievances is very important work, and we will continue to use this information as a tool to address inmate tension and fix systemic issues. As you know, in 2017, the Office of Constituent Services and the Inmate Grievance Resolution Program merged to create the Office of Constituent and Grievance Services. In addition, the Grievance Unit now reports to the Office of the Commissioner because this work is a priority for the agency. Over the last years, we achieved the goals we initially set to revamp the inmate complaint system by streamlining the process, created a technological system to track the life cycle for all complaints, increased our responsiveness to inmate complaints, and added additional resources to support this effort. However, there is much more work we need to do, and we will continue to work closely with the board to refine the process. Oh, sure. Sorry. So we did share in our response letter to the board that we will be planning some kind of scheduling and presentation to give the board access to service desks in the near future. So
That will have routine access?
yes, we'll be reaching out shortly. Have any other questions? Do you have any other questions? I'm sorry.
In the middle of your remarks, or you?
Yes, I just wanted to repeat, again, we thank the board for their support and guidance in regards to improving the inmate grievance systems. Thank you.
Any further questions or comments from anyone on the board? No?
Are you going to respond to any of do you agree with these recommendations?
So we appreciate the board's recommendations, and obviously we consider them as we continue to have internal discussions about how we can continue to improve the inmate grievance system.
No comment on all of the things that were there?
I mean, we're working on, some of the recommendations shared are some of the things we're currently working on in progress, creating new grievance forms, creating new communications plans. So some of the recommendations that's shared in the current study we do support, and we'll figure out how we can integrate in our internal proposal on how we improve the system.
Well, maybe just a specific question. The grievances come in two very different, in two modes generally. They come in through 311 and they come in through the grievance process, the majority being through 311. What are you doing to make sure that every one of those complaints that are grievable or need to be answered another way are being addressed? Do you have enough staff to do that in the facilities?
Yes, we have increased staffing since 2016 when the board issued its last report. But Bobby, I just wanted to respond to your question about the recommendations. And I think that what we welcome and we thank the board for their effort, as we said, and there's significant alignment both in the recommendations that have already been taken and underway and are reflected in the department's current process, or in edits or revisions to either policies, systems moving forward. So I think we see significant alignment, and we look forward to continued collaboration with the board on enhancements to the department's grievance process. So we're in significant agreement.
Thank you.
So in that agreement, would it be possible to get a formal response from the department, presentation perhaps at our next meeting, with respect to what recommendations you agree with and what's your process for adopting those recommendations?
Sure. I'm not sure if by the next meeting we'll have had enough time to collaborate with the board, but we did provide a formal response by letter, and then we also collaborated with the board on the draft prior to its publication. But we'll work, if we can't get it by the next meeting, Stanley, by the meeting after that, we'll have.
Okay. Yeah, whatever meeting, how much time you need in order to respond, I would appreciate that.
Perfect. Thank you.
Just real quick, with the quality assurance, does uniform staff get a chance to review, like, that might help out? Like 41% of all cases were not time-stamped. 58 of the audited complaints did not indicate a grievance except the form. Like, would a captain be able to, like, tour the area and say, oh, you missed this, just another set of eyes, or is there a confidential component to that?
So there are other layers of supervision within the unit right now. We did add additional supplies for timestamps, and currently we do have a quality assurance team that are actively reviewing stuff that is submitted into service desk to ensure we are in compliance, like timestamps and signatures.
Great, because that just seems to be like a fixable, like some things are just hard to fix, but that
Agreed.
seems to be something we could focus on. Thank you. Great.
And just to round out, I think, Bobby, your question, or Stanley, about 311 complaints. So I'll let Mr. Boyd speak to that, but I think there was some confusion for me in the board's report and some issues of clarity with respect to 311s. All 311 complaints come into the department, into the Office of Constituent and Grievance. All 311s are entered into the service desk electronic tracking system, so we'll let Mr. Boyd discuss that further.
Yes, and with the use of service desk, we're able to eliminate duplicacy. So now we have a system in place to capture duplicative complaints if an inmate previously filed a 311 as well as a grievances, so we can kind of make that combine those two complaints to ensure that an inmate receives a resolution.
Okay. What would you expect the appeal rate to be in a functioning system? This is so small in the litigious society that we all live in. It's what do you think would demonstrate a functional system?
Well, I think knowledge of the system and continued engagement between the grievance staff and the inmate population, I think that ultimately would create a better and improved system.
And the appeal rate, would you expect there to be, this is infinitesimal right now. It's, in my experience, there are usually much higher rates of appeal in a functioning grievance system, not necessarily that get borne out through the process, but certainly people who make grievances often feel that their needs are not being met through the informal process, at least at a higher rate than this.
Right. So I don't want to speculate the appeal rate, but our goal is to address all inmate complaints in real time.
Thank you.
We can look into that issue also. So back to the number, 58% of audited complaints did not indicate if the grievant accepted or rejected the resolution. So I was surprised by that figure. I was surprised that we found that in the audit, and 64% of those did not have a signature. So what happens to a complaint if the grievant neither accepted or rejected nor signed the form? What do you do with that kind of complaint? How do you count it?
So there's likely a verbal exchange between the inmate and the grievance coordinator or the grievance officer. Currently, there's no policy in regards to not filing a grievance or allowing an inmate to appeal just because he or she didn't sign it. So that's something we want to look into as well.
Anyone else? Thanks very much. We will look forward to following up on these issues. So we now have two department updates, one having to do with GMDC's closure and the young adult plan, and the other having to do with tele-visiting. So first on GMDC. In 2015, the board created a unique model and category of people in custody, young adults ages 18 through 21, who are to be housed separately and apart. The board also required the department to provide the young adults with age-appropriate programming. The revision was intended to reduce violence by segregating developmentally distinct age groups, providing age-appropriate rehabilitative opportunities, and conforming the board's standards with the requirements of New York state law and with PREA. As of July 12, 2016, 18-year-olds must only be housed with 18 to 21-year-olds, with a few exceptions for special mental health housing in accordance with the continuing variants of CHS. However, the rule has never been in effect for 19 to 21-year-olds. Since the fall of 2015, the board has continuously granted variances from this standard. The department has requested the board to consider a rule change to allow them to permanently house 19 to 21-year-olds with adults. The board last granted a variance allowing the commingling of 19 to 21-year-olds with adults in January 2018. The board expects to consider a renewal request at the July 2018 public meeting. In January of 2018, the department announced that it would close GMDC, the jail that had housed a large number of young adults, by the end of this month. As the GMDC census has decreased, so have the number of young adults in housing and young adult housing generally. Currently, only 37% of young adults are housed in young adult housing, down from a high of 75% in June of 2016. We've asked the department to update us on its progress toward closing GMDC and its plan for housing and staffing and programming for young adults that will no longer be housed in GMDC.
Good morning.
Morning.
My name is Timothy Farrell, Senior Deputy Commissioner, Department of Correction. So late last year, the agency entered into reviewing the safer, smaller, fairer system and identifying facilities to close. We reviewed all our facilities on Rikers Island, and we decided that GMDC would be that first facility that we would consolidate. We then we made that announcement in January of this year. We formed several subcommittees and one main steering committee, which involved all the stakeholders from programming, administration, operations, health services, and we met on a weekly basis, and the subcommittees also met on a weekly basis. We put together a transition plan for the relocation of some young adults into pure young adult housing units in other facilities throughout the agency. We also looked at RNDC as the expected main facility for young adults. All the 18-year-olds will be housed in RNDC. That will take place at the end of this month. We will then, as the 16 and 17-year-olds transition off the island, pursuant to Raise the Age, we will then be able to expand into RNDC with many more pure young adult housing units. We've transitioned programming staff that were specific for the young adults into RNDC for that population that we have transferred in. We have also transferred in those programming staff into the GRVC, where we've opened 2 pure young adult housing units, as well as EMTC for those that are city sentenced. We will continue to do that as we consolidate GMDC. We also have several, we have plans in place with SCOC that will be reviewed at their next meeting this month that will reconfigure 3 areas within RNDC to accommodate the Peace and Yes Center staff and programming opportunities. Once we receive that approval, we will then begin the construction and remodeling of those areas so we can get those programming spaces stood up. We have identified about 6 or so vacancies in the young adult programming counselors. We are in the process of working with HR to backfill those so we can maintain those levels of age-specific programming coordinators. We will then, once Raise the Age is fully implemented in October and that population is relocated, we will then fully transition a large, I'm not saying all the young adults, but a large portion of the young adults into RNDC, basically because that is the facility that has the abundance of programming space, educational space, and the majority of the staff there are used to dealing and working and managing the younger inmate population. Sure.
Yeah, I just want to make some comments just to make sure everybody has the historical background, which I think is really important, the historical background here. The 16 to 18-year-olds used to be our young adult, essentially our young adult population. And when state law adopted PREA and required that the 18-year-olds be separated from the 16 and 17-year-olds, at that time, under Commissioner Pond, working with the Mayor's Office of Criminal Justice, Vinnie Schiraldi, and being mindful of the national and international trend to treat young adults more like adolescents because of their unique needs and their neuroscience, this young adult plan was created. Now, what did occur then is the Department of Justice filed a lawsuit, which was consolidated with Nunez as a result, and found that there were civil rights violations against the 16, 17, and 18-year-olds, that they tended to be much more subject to the use of force. So the Department of Justice was very concerned about the 18-year-olds. And this investigation and lawsuit occurred at about or shortly before we then adopted the state law and implemented essentially the young adult plan. Now, one of the reasons that this was done was it wasn't so much to reduce the violence. The concern was, at the time we were adopting the young adult plan, and Commissioner Pond and the city was completely behind it, we were aware that there was a risk of actually greater violence. It wasn't so much that we would reduce it, but there was the sentiment that it was important to minimize the trauma of young people being incarcerated for long-term harm, to try to address the foster care to prison pipeline. We know 40 young people in foster care at any time out at Rikers, to try to reduce, in effect, the school to prison pipeline to try to reduce the disproportionate incarceration of young people of color, and that was balanced against the tension from security. Knowing that when you house all these young people together, there were greater risks. And that's the reason that we incorporated recommendations from Commissioner Pond and all the national experts, that we have all the training, that we have school, that we have programming, and that we have a really good disciplinary system that is in place. There's been a lot of great work done on the adolescent young adult plan, and I know Chief Perino helped to lead that with respect to the Department of Correction. And the only reason the 18-year-olds are really separated out, I think it's really important to be mindful, is because the Nunez consent judgment is in place, and I know the deputy monitor, Anna Friedberg, has said specifically it's much more difficult for the Department of Correction to comply with the consent judgment if they are voluntarily, willingly housing the 19, 20, and 21-year-olds in with the 18-year-olds. So it does appear, it gives the appearance of, and we granted the request by the agency to grant you the variance only for the 19, 20 to 21-year-olds, which is why the 18-year-olds have the benefit of the young adult plan, and it appears that we're sort of losing some of that benefit for the young adults. So with that backdrop, I just, in that historical background for everyone, can you tell us whether we are really reversing course here in that GMDC, which had had so much work done? I sat there and I watched all the work done. We had all the training of the officers, steady officers being assigned. We had all the renovations of all the housing units, of the school, of the recreation. I mean, an enormous amount of work was put into that unit. And now we have only 35% or 37% of our young adults housed really as young adults. Are we in fact really reversing course and abandoning the young adult program?
No, we're not abandoning it. We've taken other steps to actually improve upon it by identifying, with the Raise the Age, it gave us the option of RNDC with much greater recreation and programming space and educational space than GMDC did actually have. We are doing that. We are implementing those 18-year-olds. They will be housed in 18-year-old housing units at RNDC. That's part of this initial plan with the 18-year-olds that are currently at GMDC. We are maintaining the population that is set to graduate, which is about 40 or so at GMDC. So those will be the last group of inmates that get relocated. We are in place right now with the custody management team to develop those pure 18-year-old housing units at RNDC. And as the Raise the Age is fully implemented, we will then transition 19 to 21-year-olds into RNDC, with still maintaining the goal of having those 18-year-old housing units also within RNDC, but housed separate and apart from the 19 to 21-year-olds. So we are continuing that process. We are not taking a step back. If anything, we're going to expand upon it with adding the additional programming counselors, being able to develop the programming space, replicating what was in place at GMDC, and moving forward with this concept.
Okay, so I just have a couple of questions, and I'll turn it over to my colleagues. At the time the state law came into effect, I was literally at Rikers, and I recall the confusion of having to separate out the 18-year-olds, and we had the 18-year-olds housed separately. At that time, there was a great concern by security that by housing all the 18-year-olds together, that violence was going to skyrocket, and that part of the idea, that was part of the reason behind the young adult plan. And in terms of separation orders and gangs and housing gangs, it was thought to not be good correctional practice to house the 18-year-olds completely separately. Can you tell me what has changed?
Sure.
And whether there's any national expertise that is recommending, under these current circumstances with the Nunez consent judgment, the DOJ findings, that it's determined to be good correctional practice to house them alone?
Well, I can't speak on national recommendations pursuant to this, but at the beginning, this was before we introduced the robust young adult specific programming and developing those at GMDC with the young adult population. Currently at GMDC, the majority of the young adults are 18-year-olds. We have 70 18-year-olds and 13 19 to 21-year-olds. So the majority of the housing units at GMDC are currently occupied by 18-year-old inmates.
Because you move the 19 to 21-year-olds off into other into other housing facilities.
Yes, but they are remaining in housing units together, just the 18-year-olds. And our rate of incidence at GMDC have been very low with this particular population. We are going to mirror that at RNDC by transferring these staff that have worked with the population, have developed the rapport, both from the programming side and the custody side. They will follow the population into RNDC. We will develop those housing units and replicate them and transition them as seamlessly as possible.
So Vera, when I was last actively working very closely with the Department of Correction on your adolescent and young adult, Vera was doing some consulting, and as I last recall, Vera was going to be doing an assessment of the young adult plan program in housing. Has that assessment been done, and has Vera been consulted, and what is their opinion regarding housing the 18-year-olds completely alone? Because
Sure.
I'm actually, this is new information that this is the plan.
Sure. DC Saunders.
Thank you.
Hi, good morning.
Good morning.
It's a pleasure to see you guys. So I just wanted to just provide a little bit of context as well. And one of the things that we have to remember is when we initially started the young adult plan, we didn't have the lessons learned that we have now. So the fact that we have lessons learned that we can utilize to really address the needs of young people is a very big, I would say, factor that puts us ahead of the curve, which we were not when we first initially planned the young adult plan. And secondly, with regard to your question regarding Vera, Vera is in the process of still completing their assessment of the young adult strategy.
Do we know when that will be complete?
They just finished all of their data collection, qualitative and quantitative, and they're doing a little bit more data request, and they think they will be finished with the capturing everything this month, and then hopefully within the next couple of months they'll actually have outcomes and evaluation for us to discuss.
It's been challenging because it's been changing all along, but did you all consult Vera in particular, because they have a lot of expertise in this, about housing 18-year-old men alone in their own housing units?
Well, the interesting thing is that Vera has learned a lot from us because they then implemented a young adult strategy along with Connecticut. So we've been collaborating together on a number of different issues.
With respect to answering that question, the 18-year-olds.
In specifically, we've discussed several different cohorts, but I can't say we talked or asked opinion regarding what we should do with any specific age group, because again, we have many more lessons learned than we had when we initially started this project.
One last question. I'm sorry. Will any of the resources that were meant to be available to house the 18 to 21-year-olds, are those resources going to be diverted to the 18-year-old only, to where there's less of those resources for the 19 to 21-year-olds? Because I am mindful that the City Council approved huge expenditure of, I believe, $20 million, which was for the 18 to 21-year-olds.
No,
it was
the good news,
adolescent and young adult.
The good news, we're still trying to ensure that we have a comprehensive, diversified portfolio of opportunities for young people, regardless of where they are.
I just want to address what the historical, part of the historical
yes.
account that you provided, and I thank you, Judge. I don't believe, though, that it's my understanding that the reason why the 18 to 21-year-olds were housed together is not because of the Nunez consent judgment, but because for resources and for providing programming. From my understanding of what Commissioner Ponce's purpose was.
It was about that time, that's all.
So I just wanted to make that clarification. Thank you.
Yeah, the timing was about that time, and there was a concern about housing 18-year-olds with all the adults, and so why not house them with a young adult, since the national and international trend is to treat young people in their early 20s more like the adolescents. Thank you. And just what percentage of young adults right now, here today, do you plan to have housed in RMDC under the young adult plan?
I really can't answer that question specifically. The majority of our young adults, who are general population.
Thank you.
Yeah, I just go. GMDC, I kind of like scratched my head when the department picked that facility. I know RMDC, we have problems with the doors. They're very flimsy compared to GMDC, which aren't great either, but they're definitely a better construction. And when all the work that went into GMDC with the young adults, we have so many other facilities. Tim, how can we pick that one? I mean, I'm sure there's a specific, line of thought why you did, and I'm just curious with that. And also, I know when I taught there, the staff there was very informative. There was like 33 housing areas assigned to young adults, and I'm sure that's what you're focusing on RNDC when the 16 and 17-year-olds do leave us. Are you going to go higher than that number, or are you going to stick around that number? What's the plan? I guess there's two questions there.
Well, overall, the young adult population has dropped by about a third from when we started this process 2+ years ago. We also have in place a large budget, $5 million door replacement project at RNDC, which was another reason we looked at RNDC, because the money was going in there, and the doors that will be installed will be even better than GMDC's doors. They will be unhinged, not tracked, so that makes you should understand the issues we have with tracked doors as opposed to hinged doors. Right. So that was the other reason. Raise the age also allowed us an opportunity with the 16 and 17-year-olds vacating the facility. It gave us the opportunity to use that real estate specific to the education and programming space that I talked about, to incorporate it and expand upon it with the young adult population as a whole. So those were a lot of the reasons that went into identifying GMDC as the target facility. Our census was relatively low at GMDC as well, and we were suffering some significant infrastructure issues that were appearing. Now, all our facilities have infrastructure issues. So we identified the one that we thought we could make the necessary improvements and manage this population as safely as possible.
Gotcha. So the cost would be less to put into RNDC than it would be to bring up GMDC? Because I know we spent so much money.
Based on the staffing that goes into GMDC,
right.
The bed efficiency ratios, there were a lot of factors went into it. It wasn't just a lift and shift, this is what we want to do. We took a very detailed approach and a hard look, and we feel as though we're making the best decision to manage this population and still maintain the level of services for this particular age group.
A couple of questions. So what's the new timetable to close on GMDC? And I see we have about 214 people housed there, according to our data.
Yeah, today's count at GMDC is 171.
171?
Yeah, there's only 82 young adults, that's 18 to 21, and we have 89, 22 and over. The timetable is June 30th. There will be no inmates housed at GMDC after June 30th. We are the last group that transfers out of GMDC will those that are set to graduate in the end of the month. Like I said, we are keeping them in GMDC until the graduation is complete, so we don't disrupt the educational services that these individuals have been attending and are on track to graduate. So those will be the last group of inmates that depart the facility.
So we're going to move.
RNDC be ready to receive all these new people?
We've already started RNDC. We've identified housing units, and we're transferring out large groups of the adult inmates who did occupy many of the units at RNDC, so we can make the space and accommodate the 18-year-olds and other young adults as we go forward with the system.
Without the construction that you're waiting for
SCOC? There will be a delay to get all that programming space up and running, but we are confident that the existing space at RNDC and adjusting the schedules, we will be able to provide a sufficient level of programming for the population. It will be better once we get the construction done and the approvals come in through SCOC. You know, we worked with them to develop these plans. They had some concerns initially. They permitted us to resubmit, which is grateful. We're grateful for that because they rushed it onto this month's agenda, so we're not delayed on that. So once we get the green light, optimistically we get the green light at the end of the month, we will then work with our FMRD unit and we will begin the process of remodeling and retrofitting those programming areas so we can get it on board as fast as possible.
It'll take 6 months from...
It'll take several months, yes. I'm not going to pull any punches with that. Things can... And we're dealing with retrofitting areas, so we don't know what we may encounter as we remodel. As with any type of remodeling job, there are secrets in the walls that may cause little delays here and there. But we're aggressive in the approach, and we're committed to make it happen and get it stood up as fast as possible.
I know Brianne is leading a lot of the board's work on with young adults. I just would request that the department keep us updated monthly on the progress. I think moving young people into RNDC without the full construction that y'all need in order to do full program, I know you're going to do your best. We just like to be informed of how it's going, and let's keep our eye out on
Stanley,
that.
I'll be more than happy to give you an update each month.
Thank you.
You're moving the adults out. Are they still the older adults?
Yes.
Because I know, when I was in that facility as a warden, I convinced the department to put the older adults in because the young adults were so challenging, and older detainees have a little less problems, a little more to the clinic usually, but a lot less problems when it comes behaviorally. If we put all 19 to 21-year-olds, that's going to put a lot of issues on the staff. If the whole facility just becomes young adults, are we looking at that to keep the safety
Jim, let me just clarify. We're going to try and mirror what we had at GMDC, which is we are going to maintain a certain number of adult inmates. We are looking to replace some of those older inmates at RNDC with the inmates who are currently at GMDC who have been serving as form of a mentorship type of role, so we can continue that. Like I said, we are going to try and mirror and make this as seamless as possible on this transition. So we will be maintaining a certain number of adult population. What that number is right now, I can't answer, but we are going to look at that, and we are going to use that mentorship model that we did have in place at GMDC as well.
Thank you, Commissioner Farrell. We appreciate the complexity of the movement process. That's not going to get easier. That's going to get. It's going to continue over time. And I understand why GMDC. You put a lot of money into it, and you're losing that. But something had to go. However, I'd like to ask you, and I'd also appreciate if the commissioner could comment on this question, because it's quite fundamental, the issues that Brianne has been raising, which is what is the department's commitment to a young adult program. The history is not only important to this; it underlies what we're talking about. New York City still has a policy of addressing the issues of criminally involved 18 to 24-year-olds. That is the city policy on this issue, and we stopped at 22 during the rulemaking process, but that was arbitrary in our hearings and in the evidence that we gathered in our discussions with the department. And I know Commissioner Pont's concerns and the national concerns and the Connecticut concerns right now. The age is 24, not 19, which is what it feels like the department has done right now. You've created a young adult program for 18-year-olds substantially because you're under federal monitoring right now, and a program that should be for young adults, which you go up to 24, is not. There's not a commitment to it. In fact, there is there's a fear of it. That's not fear. There's not a commitment to doing that. In fact, there's a commitment not to do it. You want us to make a rule which eliminates, which changes our rule, which requires that the department maintain a young adult population rather than, and we've been giving you variances on that right now, but it doesn't seem to be in the spirit of the science. It does not seem to be in the spirit of the city policy, and it's certainly not in context with the national policy. So thank you, Commissioner. I appreciate your coming up.
So both in private meetings with the board members and in public, I have stated that the agency is committed to providing programming to those specific age groups. That has not changed. And once we move to borough-based facilities, we won't have a young adult facility. And so we will be making plans so that regardless of where those age groups are, they will have appropriate program. That has not changed.
Will you have young adult housing in those facilities?
Yes, that's correct. There will be units designed specifically for that population. They will get specialized program. So nothing has changed in our commitment to delivering those services to that population. We understand the science. I used that science when I was in Maine. That's where Commissioner Pont learned all of that. That's where it started. And so I brought that commitment here to the City of New York, and I am committed to that.
No, I realize that, Commissioner, and I appreciate it. And do you extend that up to 24 as everyone else does?
We'll take a look. Well, I'm not sure that your statement that everybody else does is accurate.
The city's policy is up to 24.
We will take a look at that as we expand into the other facilities and look at our borough-based facilities and those designs.
Okay. Certainly want to encourage you to do that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for your commitment. I appreciate it.
We good?
Any other questions? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Stanley, we'll talk about revisiting, tele-visiting.
Yes. I had asked the department to present on tele-visiting. In 2014, the Brooklyn Library started tele-visiting for families and individuals with folks incarcerated on Rikers. It has since expanded, and I asked the department to present on how the program has been going and what's the plan for the future of the program. So thank you.
Thank you. Just as a clarification, as I understand it, because I had not been here, but televisits formally started back in 2012 with a pilot program. Only about 14 visits were conducted at that time. It was through community-based organizations. There was not yet a full integration with the public library system. Through support by the City Council, funding was offered to expand that program. The New York Public Library has expanded their locations to about 25 different locations. We have about 47 kiosks in different, each of our facilities is represented. Some have 4, some have 1, but it's a kind of a spectrum across. The number of televisits has increased every year. It's been a great benefit to a lot of people. It's particularly useful when it's combined with a lot of the programs that the libraries and other community-based organizations incorporate. Between December of 2014 and May of 2018, we've conducted roughly about 2,500 televisits through the New York Public Library program alone, and another 500 with other kind of community-based organizations that have their kiosks within specific areas that community-based organizations own. We are currently working on evaluating what expansions might be. Obviously, that requires a lot of negotiation with the public libraries. The community-based organizations would like to be involved as well, but as a centralized location, the public libraries offer a lot of advantages just because they're much more widely known. It's easier to direct people to the public libraries as opposed to the headquarters of certain community-based organizations. We're currently renegotiating an MOU with the public libraries, which will allow us to kind of evaluate what expansions are possible. Obviously, right now it requires a very specific step where family members go to the public libraries, and if there are any alternatives to that to kind of move it away from just a central location, that's something we have to discuss later, and it's also a factor of technology and just kind of what data is available in terms of streaming such video sources from other locations. But in the meantime, we certainly see the great benefits to it. We're certainly expanding both programs and courts as well as the televisits themselves. The technology is useful for interaction. We remain committed to this being something that supports in-person contact visits, not something that replaces. Just, I know that that is a question that sometimes comes up, but we see it as an opportunity to expand the opportunities for families and individuals to talk, meet, see each other, have some sort of connection other than the phone, but a little less than the scheduled physical visits. And then that's an update on the televisits. I'm happy to answer some questions on those, but I can also move on to the visit bus because I know that you asked about that as well.
Yeah, I want to get update on that. Can you talk about like what's the department doing to inform the public of the televisiting? Is
Sure.
there anything on the website? Are you informing visitors as they come in? Are you informing?
Yeah, we partner with the public libraries and the CBOs to do a lot of the external information sharing. Certainly we have signs up near the kiosks for individuals in the jails, but because the scheduling has to happen from the family side through either the CBOs or the libraries, a lot of the information is kind of focused on coordinating that with them. I have to admit, I don't actually know exactly if where on our website that information is, but I can check in on that and make sure that I can get that to you. But we know and have worked closely with the libraries and the CBOs to get the information out.
And being that this is not part of the minimum standards, this is sort of in addition to, are y'all looking at whether or not this is an incentive for people to follow the rules? Are you finding, what are y'all looking at the sort of
I think that
collateral impact?
towards the pilot and the current structure of the program, it has not been involved as much as an incentive, simply as a request and an access that we afford to family members and inmates who request it. Certainly there is a component where we do associate with some of the programming, but it is not in and of itself an incentive. You don't get this if you offer, but because you are using it, there are other programs that you can use offered, Daddy and Me. There are kind of programs that we work with the libraries and other CBOs. So we have not formally explored that.
But it is, if someone gets an infraction or they will not be able to use it, right? Or have y'all?
So right now, much like our visits, if there are concerns with them, and there have been instances where, using the televisits to either do salacious acts or pass information, then we do stop the televisit on those grounds, and then we prevent people from using it. But it is not generally if these 4 infractions occur, you then get televisits taken away.
Gotcha.
Yeah, and on the televisits, otherwise I'll move on the bus visits a little bit. Just as an update on the bus visits, I think that the pilot is going very well. We've increased ridership to about 30 to 80 per day. What that does mean, obviously, is some buses are very full, and there are days when buses are completely empty. We are expanding buses so that before the end of June, we'll probably have 2 more buses to at least address some of the delay. Traffic is what it is. We are trying to do a better job, but we are often late. Sometimes it's minimal, and sometimes it can be 45 minutes or so, depending on the traffic. And we always knew that going into this, committing to about 6 buses, but the next 2 are coming out. We'll see how that addresses it. We have not yet explored other locations. We want to focus on these 2 locations, particularly as a transportation hub from our analysis of the visit registration that goes on from where they're coming from. At the same time, we're taking a look at some of the concerns on just the driver's side as well and signage. But so far, people have been certainly happy with the ride itself. I think there are still concerns about kind of how do you get information. There are clearly concerns about just the delay in time and planning for that, but we are trying to address that with more buses, and then we'll figure out whether or not we can do better on actually having very specific times once we learn what the route averages are. So it's been for us at least, from a pilot standpoint, I think a success. From those who have ridden it, a success. We can certainly do more, and we are committed to doing more with that. So,
yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. Great initiatives. Anyone else? Questions? Okay, now we turn to the public comment period. As we all know, there are 3 minutes allocated per speaker. The iPad on the stage will tell you the time you have left. If the speaker refuses to yield the floor, he or she may be deemed out of order. In addition or instead of your oral testimony, we are happy to receive written comment. We take phone calls, letters, emails, and website forms or drop-ins to our office at 1 Center Street. So today, the first speaker is Dale Wilker.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. My name's Dale Wilker. I am a staff attorney with the Prisoners' Rights Project of the Legal Aid Society. I'm here to comment on the board's report on the grievance process. I think without going over all the specifics, it's clear and an imperative that the board at this point, given its previous reports and the current report which substantiates previous findings, that the board initiate rulemaking and to the object of getting a standard in place for the department to follow, particularly with respect to the procedure of the grievance system, to make sure that it is both efficient and responsive. I want to make clear that we are not saying that the board should make rules about the substantive categories with which the department in its discretion deems to be grievable. Just the procedure to make sure that it is efficient and responsive. We know in our experience at the Legal Aid Society from talking to clients, as indicated by the board, that there are few, if any, replies to informal grievances. Very few people know to appeal, and those who do appeal tell us that they don't get replies to their appeals. Something is broken in that system. Obviously, with the implications for exhausting grievances, there is an inherent tension between the department's desire to find out problems in the jails, but also knowing that if grievances are not completed, the department avoids a lawsuit, particularly in federal court, for civil rights violations. That might be also the subject of grievances. As with respect to replies, we've noticed a couple of things. One is that inmates sometimes are just directed or to aspects of the system that really aren't part of the grievance system. And I'm not talking about just referrals to other aspects of the department. In particular, we had one complaint from a transgender person who tried to get transgender housing, was told essentially that her complaint was denied. When she tried to appeal, she was ultimately told that she should just file a writ in the law library and was shut out of the grievance process. That obviously indicates that there's a particular problem either with staff or with the department's practices with respect to items that we indeed tried to get both the department's direct attention to, as well as the board's. We recently received a letter with respect to 311 complaints and its integration into the grievance process. The letter writer said that BKDC, the Brooklyn House grievance staff, told him that the 311 process and the grievance process cancel each other out, and therefore he couldn't file a grievance. Now, this and would not get a reply from DOC to his issue. Now, if this statements are true, if the grievance office is making this statement, then obviously there's a need for retraining, serious retraining of that staff. If the statements are true, then there's a serious problem with the department's approach to handling the inmate complaints through the 311 process. We have a number of recommendations for those particular rulemaking. First of all 311... Well, thank you. We will submit written comments. If the board has any questions, we'd be happy to answer them.
Thanks very much. Okay, next is Ted Jack.
Good morning.
So my name's Ted. I am the Director of Advocacy for NYU Law's Prison Reform and Education Project, and I spent the last year interning with the Urban Justice Center Mental Health Project. I'm going to be reading a statement this morning at the request of an individual who I interviewed at Rikers over the course of several weeks in April. I've been in West Facility for about 4 months, and I feel hopeless here. Last December, I was jumped by 5 men in the Enhanced Supervision Housing Unit and badly cut in the face. I don't know why they did it, I really don't, but what I do know is that this institution that was supposed to be responsible for my safety failed me, and my case is not unique. As it's run now, the Enhanced Supervision Housing Unit is incredibly dangerous, like people could die dangerous. COs give no consideration to facility politics or what people are in for when making living assignments. They put individuals with nonviolent offenses together with individuals who are in for homicide. They allow people to be placed together, rival gang members who they know have issues with one another, and it leads to so much violence. The COs just cover it up. I've seen COs give people the keys to unlock their restraints or accidentally leave certain cells unlocked. I felt unsafe in the Enhanced Supervision Unit the entire time I was there, and I was right. After being assaulted, I was transferred to West without a hearing. The lack of process almost made me feel like my assault was being treated as if it had somehow been my fault. I've been here for the last 4 months. In some ways, it's better than the Enhanced Supervision Unit. There's a TV in my cell, for example, which, when it's working, is nice. But nonetheless, we are in isolation. We're prohibited from locking out in the day room with anyone else, and our social contact and educational opportunities are generally non-existent. I suffer from bipolar disorder, anxiety, audiovisual hallucinations, depression, and other mental health issues. Despite this, and the fact that I was in a number of hospitals when I was younger, I have been unable to gain access to the prescription medication I was taking before being incarcerated. Here at West, I only get mental health visits twice a month. They are usually no more than 15 minutes long and are completely useless because they're carried out through the cell bars where everyone around can hear. So naturally, no one ever feels comfortable enough to be vulnerable or really talk about their problems. I'm not allowed contact visits. I don't know why. I haven't had an infraction for months and months. When I ask why, I'm not given a clear answer. My family has stopped coming to see me because it's too upsetting for them to only be able to visit through glass. I just want to hug my mom. I'm not on box time. I should have access to medication for my mental health issues. I should have access to education even though I'm 23. I want so badly to better myself and change the world, but this cycle just keeps pushing me down. We need people to interact with. We need experiences to inspire us. How are we ever going to re-enter society without education, without having meaningful social interactions for months at a time? I just want to be able to hug my mom. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, Dr. Cohen.
I just want to ask Dr. Hospital if you could follow up on that complaint about the examination through the bars and let the board know what the practice and policy are. And this is the last time I've observed that also at ESH. Thank you very much.
Dory Loris?
Hello, I'm Dory Lewis from the Prisoners' Rights Project of the Legal Aid Society. The department's new PREA corrective action plan for investigations seems a combination to us of excuses, wishful thinking, and misleading statements. Excuses because it continues to blame the problem of delayed investigations and high caseloads on so-called non-PREA allegations. But as we wrote in our April letter to the board, the department never makes clear what they mean by a non-PREA allegation. An allegation that arises during a search can be a serious allegation of sodomy. Is that being considered a, quote, non-PREA allegation? Wishful thinking because the department says that they're going to be hiring more investigators. We're glad that they've made the hires that they have, but we don't know what the basis for their statement is that they're going to be hiring 5 more supervisors and 11 more investigators within a few months when they've had open positions that they couldn't fill for months and months and months. And misleading statements because they're only talking about one part of your standards about investigations. They fail to talk about all of the other requirements of the investigation standard. In their written report, in their written revised corrective action plan, they said that they complete all investigations within 72 hours. That is completely inconceivable. The requirements of your standards require that the perpetrator be questioned, all witnesses be questioned, the complainant be questioned, all evidence be obtained, credibility assessments be made, prior allegations, if it's an allegation against staff, be reviewed, and a determination made. That can't be what they mean by completing an investigation within 72 hours. If they mean opening a file, well, sure. But if they mean interviewing someone within 72 hours, we're skeptical about that. It's not consistent with an allegation that we conveyed yesterday about a transgender person who told us that on June 1st, a male inmate entered her cell in AMKC and forced her to perform oral sex. On June 5th, which is more than 72 hours later, she said that she was interviewed by PREA staff who facilitated her getting medical care, but that as of June 8th, when we interviewed her, she had not been interviewed by Investigations Division staff or by DOI staff. And more importantly, perhaps, by June 8th, a week after this happened, after she says this happened, and a week after she reported it, she was still housed in the same housing unit as the alleged perpetrator. We think that the plan submitted last night by the department is wholly inadequate. We appreciate the board's efforts to date, but we also think the board needs to keep holding the department accountable for compliance with its PREA standards. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Lewis. Dr. Cohen?
I'm concerned about I actually meant to ask this question earlier. Are the non-PREA, what number of the non-PREA complaints relate to searches and the other material that Dory was referencing?
Good morning. My name is Faye Yalardi. I'm the Assistant Commissioner for PREA. You're asking for the specific numbers of allegations that's related to searches, right?
Well, they're approximately, they're almost equal, there are another 1,000 non-PREA allegations that have not been investigated. And I'm interested in what percentage of those are related to searches, yes. To complaints made during that search case.
I understand your question. We don't have a specific number or percentage now. We'll have to get back to you on that number. You're talking about the 1,000 cases that she testified to, right?
Right. There are two numbers that you have. There's a 2,500 number, there's a 1,200 number. The 2,500 is the PREA, the 1,200 is non-PREA. You have to investigate those, but I just wondered, what are those?
We're going to get back to you on the specific numbers and the percentages for that.
Okay, so maybe you can explain what the categories are for all of those.
Sure, when we get back to you. Absolutely.
Okay. Follow up for us. Thank you, Faith.
Any other questions, comments from the board? There being no more public speakers, I think we are adjourned. We'll see you here on July 10th, 9 o'clock. Thanks very much.